everyone. You are listening to the Rachael Maves Podcast, and I'm Rachael Maves, your host. Today, we are speaking with Nick Greer. Nick is the principal consultant and founder of Klein Consulting and Guide at Fearless Guides, with over 21 years of experience in education and systemic reform. Previously, he served as executive VP at Thread and worked at Baltimore City Schools as director of science and a high school biology teacher. He was named Baltimore City School City Teacher of the Year and served as a teaching ambassador fellow in the U.S. Department of Education. In 2010, he was honored to be selected as a teaching ambassador fellow at the United States Department of Education, where he worked in the office of the secretary during the Obama administration, which, Nick, I had no idea. So I definitely want to hear a little bit more about that, but thanks for joining today.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how you ended up choosing a career in education. What led to that path?
Oh, wow. Let's see where to start. I think if my mom were here, she would say that she knew from the beginning. I had like a little, like a desk, like a chalkboard desk, and I would like sit at it and just like write all the time and like do lessons with like stuffies and stuff. That was in like 1984, right? And I like totally rejected that idea. Like totally. Like as a young adult, I grew up in a rural part of Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania. There's really not that much around. And I needed to get out of town as badly as I could at 18. And I was the first generation college goer. And I was just like, I'm done with all this. I don't want to do any of it. I'm going to go get a neuroscience degree and work in a lab. And that's it, right? And so I left. We needed in-state tuition since I was in first-generation college goer. We didn't really have that much money. And I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and I got into science, the hard sciences, biology, all that kind of stuff. And I just struggled. I mean, mightily. And I still loved science. I still loved neuroscience, but I just didn't really like the idea of working in a lab. And I didn't see it way. And one day, I mean, I was having one of those like existential crises that one has when they're 21 or 22. I guess that right. And I ended up, a friend of mine was like going to this after school program in Pittsburgh, and it was like this middle school, elementary, upper elementary, middle school, after school care program at like a church, like a local church. And we walked to it from campus, and I started looking around, and I was like, who are these kids? Where is this? What is this? What's going on? And I mean, it was like chaos in this space. And I just kept going back. And there wasn't really much for us to do there besides like, they were like, just keep eyes on kids kind of thing. And I didn't really understand what that meant. And then one day I was there and I was like talking to another adult, and I like heard this crash in the corner, and I turned and I looked, and there was this like young girl. She must have been like, I don't know, 4th or 5th grade or whatever. And she had thrown this thing she was playing with like across the room, and it like shattered into pieces. And I was like, what happened? And I walked over, and she's just like angry. And I realized what she was playing with. She was playing with one of these like, it's like a 3-dimensional puzzle. It has like cogs and wheels.
Oh, sure.
And like the whole objective is to build it so that you spin this part and this other part spins.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And she's like just having a hard time with it. And I as I was walking over, I like kneeled down, and I kind of like connected with her, and I started asking her some questions, and then I started telling her some stories about how I would get like angry about like physics problems. And it was like embarrassing that I would get angry, and I like kind of ingratiated myself for a moment. Yeah. And she like kind of connected a little bit, and then I was like, so you want to pick these pieces up? And so we like picked the pieces up, and I started asking her questions about the layout of it. And then after I asked like 1 or 2 questions, she just like figured it out and started like doing it. And she was so happy that she started running around the room, like telling everybody, like carrying it from place to place. Look what I did. Look what I did. Look what I did. And I just sat there, and I was like, Mom was right. Like this is what I do for the rest of my life. And so like literally, like people tell these stories, but literally the next day, I walked to the registrar's office and the education department, and I asked, what does it take for me to turn my biology degree and my neuroscience credits into a degree in education? And they were like, you're almost done. Finish a biology degree and get your master's in education, right? There's these 2 courses that you need to take in the next year. And so I did as like prereqs. And I did that. And then I started teaching in Pittsburgh. I got my master's then, and I came to Baltimore, and I've been doing it ever since, in and out of different ways. So like I was a teacher for 8 years total. I worked in administrative work. I worked with federal government for a year in a fellowship. And then I kind of pivoted and worked in a nonprofit organization, but it was still education based, but it was relationship education based. So on paper, it looked like mentoring work, but really it was empowering people to build relationships with one another across lines of difference and kind of restitching Baltimore back together across its red lines. And we really learned a lot about what it takes to like help people see the humanity in others and to see themselves in others and perspective taking. And that initial relationship building that I started with, right, that's how you educate. Is letting people feel like they have a sense of belonging, and connecting with them at a deep and vulnerable level, like the safe vulnerability. I've been doing that ever since.
I love that, Nick. So tell me a little bit about like the consulting work that you're doing now, and where's that through line, and how do you see that continuing to play out?
Yeah. So like at Halo Klein, my company, we help organizations and leaders go through transitions. And I'll just give the story behind the name for a second, and then I'll talk about some of the other work that we do too. So the name is it harkens back to my biology degree. It also harkens back to the backyard where it was born in Baltimore, which is where I'm sitting right now. The Chesapeake Bay. Chesapeake Bay is a Halo Klein on a really large scale, and a Halo Klein just means basically like when fresh water meets salt water. The mixture of those 2 things, you can see this like really acutely in like a cenote or something if you do cave diving. But when you have freshwater and saltwater mix, there's this blurry section between the 2 before you get through it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like when you're swimming in freshwater and then you go through to saltwater, you've got to go through this really messy middle called the Halo Klein. And I feel like that's really a huge analogy for how disorienting change is and how disorienting transitions are. So Halo Klein supports organizations and people to go through those transitions, leaders to kind of like lead change and manage change and sustain change, which I think is wildly important today as we sit here and have this conversation, given, the still beginning quarter of 2025.
Yeah.
Things are changing.
Yeah.
And I also do this work on a larger scale with a larger company called Fearless Guides. I'm a guide. And I support organizations to go through not just transitions, but also to do like strategy development and to determine like what their vision is and do like guiding and coaching, executive coaching style kind of work. And it all comes down to, like I said at the beginning, like building a relationship to establish trust, and then having enough trust to be able to like speak vulnerably who you are, and then being able to move from that onto how do we connect with other leaders and other people to kind of bring the best out of them. And so, that's kind of where I've been.
I love it. And I love that the story that you tell about connecting with the student, like that you're grounding it first in empathy and connecting as humans. And then you get to the space of, now how do we move forward? And it's just like, it seems so common sense. And yet it's something that I think we all could use a little bit more practice with.
I think the hardest part, in my opinion, at least it has been for me, I don't know about you, Rachel, but the hardest part, I think, is connecting with yourself first.
Yeah.
You got to figure out really who are you once you know that part, and what are your hangups? What are the things that like really trigger you? What are the pieces of like another person, the things you see that sort of, I don't know, grind your gears, the pet peeves, the things that throw you off. I mean, we see this a lot as parents, and then when you can understand that, then you can connect through those. I think, Brene Brown says really well, we don't ever have the same lived experiences as another person,
Right.
right? But we do have the same feelings and emotions. And so if you can connect at the emotional level, like I know what it means to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel happy.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the same experience that led me to that. But resonating and connecting at that
Yeah.
feeling and experience, I think is critically important for all of us to do.
Yeah.
You're right. We don't do it enough today.
No. Well, and it takes practice too, right? Like it really is an intentional bringing it to the forefront, and it takes practice to live in that space.
Yeah. And it also, and listen, this is a thing that I think is in some ways to bring it into the education world. Like, I don't know that I think it's happening in small pockets, but I don't know that we're helping our young people on a day-to-day basis, let alone like the work I do today with organizations, executives, and other leaders. Like, I don't think we're doing it enough on the small scale
Yeah.
in order to practice it on the large scale.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a thing that Adrienne Marie Brown talks about. She's an author and talks a lot about like emergent strategy and all that kind of stuff. But I think they point out really well that if like it's like a fractal, right? It's like if you can't do small d democracy, or you can't do like hard conversations at home with the people you love, or if you can't like actually like be empathetic on a really small scale, if we don't practice that stuff in the classroom where it doesn't have as many stakes, right, as it does on the large scale, how can we expect and anticipate that we're going to grow up and be able to do this on such a large scale on behalf of such large needs as companies, organizations, countries, whatever?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. On that note, as you think about education and some of the things that are happening right now in that space, what keeps you up at night? What are the things that you feel like we really need to be thinking about?
Too much.
Yeah. It's something like when I first started this podcast, it was still coming like off the tail end of the pandemic, but so much has shifted in that time that like I feel like the focus now, those things that are burdensome have really changed.
Yeah, I mean, so I also have the vantage point of sitting on a state board in Maryland. And, I'm not here in the capacity of being a state board member, but I will say that just looking across the landscape, not only in Maryland, but across the country, like there are so many things like that we can point to. There's increasing gaps across, you pick the demographic, right? Like young men and boys, black, white, or race, right? We could say socioeconomic. We could say the gender gap. I said young men and boys, like special education. Obviously, like that stuff is happening and has continued to happen, and our systems have not fully closed those gaps or proven that they can't. So, I mean, does that keep me up at night? It's kind of like background noise. It's always there. And I think it's a thing that we're fighting for constantly. Acutely, what keeps me up at night is that I don't think that we are, going back to a thing I just said, like we're not focusing enough on teaching people how to create a sense of belonging in the spaces where we organize. And so if we're talking about like a classroom, I don't feel like our education prep programs are doing enough yet to support teachers and young teachers to come into a classroom and then say, here's how I forge a relationship with a parent. Here's how I forge a relationship with a young person that's obviously professional, right? And that's obviously like a bounded relationship that is like within the binds of like what it takes to be a teacher. But at the same time, it is a way that allows a young person and their family to feel like they belong in that classroom. I mean, the pandemic did so many things to us and taught us a lot. But one of the things that I think it really did was it gave parents a viewpoint on the classroom at a time when we were all going through massive upheaval and change and then a massive transition. And so the view that a lot of us got into our children's classrooms was probably the worst that we could have seen while like we're sitting at home and teachers were trying to figure this out. At the same time, at the pace of the world changing and all the other things that were going on. And so what I worry about right now is that we've got to recapture that and reclaim that sort of like humanity and invitation to come back into the classroom for parents. who have felt sort of locked out and like they don't have the kind of expertise that a teacher does in order to be what a parent really is, which is the first teacher.
Yeah.
The number of parents, so a reason why I talk a little bit about parents is I'm a parent member on the board in Maryland. And the number of parents that I hear from on a weekly basis that say, I don't understand how to teach my child to read because I don't understand these like terms. What's a telegraph? What's a phoneme? What's a grapheme? I learned how to sound it out, right? Or like same way with math, like the age-old story. Like I don't know how you do new math, and I feel like we are not providing our parents with those resources or even the invitation in so many ways. Is it happening? Sure, it's happening in pockets, and really great teachers, educators, leaders, school leaders are doing this and inviting their families in community schools and providing a safe space for everyone to feel welcome. I just don't think we're doing it on a broad enough scale. And I think it's creating more divides and more difficulty. And I think it has a larger impact on learning than thing.
I agree with you. And it wasn't recently, maybe a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago now. Time's flying by. Tim, one of our we had a student on the podcast, Timmy Alori, and what she was talking about, she's a freshman, and she talked about her experience as a student going through the pandemic. And one of the things that she highlights is that need for human connection. And it was just interesting to hear it come from a student, like this kid that's saying, this is what we need and it's so important, and we feel like there's pieces of it but it's missing, and she really highlighted that experience of what it was like during the pandemic, having nothing and then coming back but still feeling like it wasn't quite enough, and what does that mean and look like. So and
to that point, like I taught between the years of 2003 to 2010. And over that period of time, I also worked in Baltimore City Schools, for 3 or 4 years after, 4 or 5 years after that. But over that period of time, I saw the advent of climate assessments and data around like collecting the data from the students, the parents, and the teachers, right? And the school staff. And that started to happen nationally everywhere. And I remember I was in my classroom administering one of those assessments. It was like during homerooms, chaos time, and I'm sitting there reading it, and I was like, one of the questions that we ask the kids is, does a teacher know my name? And it was like, why is that a question? Like, I remember being like a 26-year-old, like, why is that a question? Why is that even a thing? And then I started to it opened my eyes, and I started to understand there are kids that walk through the halls and they never get called by name ever. There's kids that walk into their classrooms and they never get called by name ever. And then they don't know. And if we have to ask the question, then it means that kids think, or at least some kids think, that adults don't care about them.
Yeah.
How long is it until I stop coming to school or until I divest in all of this and I just don't do it anymore?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we think about some of these pieces that you're bringing up, especially this component of connection, what are 2 ways that you feel like we could move forward?
I think it's easy to point the finger at educator prep programs. I'm not going to do that. I don't think that's 100% true and fair. I think one way to move forward is for everybody to begin, and I mean the adults, right? Because those are the ones that are most in power, to begin sort of reflecting on what role they play in creating a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
Right? Who they are. Go back to the thing I said kind of in the beginning around reflect on who you are and what you bring to the table, what your trigger points are, what your things are, and how you play a role in that relationship, and kind of bravely step one step closer to people. Even if it's across a line of difference.
Yeah.
Another part of that then comes to another mindset shift. So this isn't we can enact this in policy. It's build a sense of curiosity. So once you have an understanding of who you are, then be curious of who other people are and what they're bringing with them. I was just in a conversation yesterday where I asked the question of a person that I was sort of coaching and working with, where they were having an interpretation of people's actions as a blatant disregard for policy and rule. Right. And then I said, okay, so that's your initial interpretation. What's another interpretation that gives them the benefit of the doubt? And they're like, oh, they're afraid. How do we change our actions when we're working with somebody who's afraid versus they have a blatant disregard for the rules, right, or the policy? And so as a teacher, we can do the same thing. If I'm thinking of a child and I'm working with a kid and I'm thinking about them, like, is this a person who is set up from a place of fear or set up from a place of, I don't feel like anybody cares about me here? How am I going to change my interaction with them and the way that I'm showing up in that moment for them? Because it's not that I think them as a person who is just trying to break the rules. Nobody woke up this morning and they came just to try to break the rules.
Yeah, that's right. I love what you said too, Nick, because I do feel like sometimes we over-index on policy where we're trying to solve real problems in this space of, well, if we just legislate more or put more parameters in place. And there are some things actually that it has more to do with the human side of it than it does in just putting those rules in place. And I think the danger can be that we think, well, we put the rule in place, now it should just shift. Like everything should be in a different place and better. And then we act surprised when it's not. But it's messier work, right? To slow down, to address the human side of it, to engage in the halo Klein, like you're talking about, the murkiness.
That's right. And determine when we're making that change, like, what is it that I had in the first place that I can keep? What is it that doesn't serve me? And how am I going to shift through that moment? And what do I need to keep with if I move through?
Yeah. As we wrap up our time together, Nick, this is always my favorite question that I ask at the end, because everybody comes at it from such a different lens. But what is the one question in education that we're not asking, that you're not hearing people bring up, that we really should be?
So I hear a lot of arguments about parents' rights. I mean, a lot. And I feel like we're missing something here. I think that parents feel like they're locked out of a classroom, like they don't have access. And the way that they're working to regain that access, back to something you just said, Rachel, is like they're trying to legislate it.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think the question that's not being asked is actually, why do parents feel like they need those rights? Like, why now?
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And what is it that we can be doing to actually forge and bridge connection or relationship with parents in a way that provides them, like I said, maybe even a little bit earlier, the tools, the resources, the strategies to be the first teacher at home, which we really are. And I feel like, I'm not going to put this in the backs of teachers. Teachers are really busy. Administrators are really busy. It's really hard out there to do this. There is a lot of content and there is a lot of jargon in the way that we teach. And to bridge that gap takes a lot of extra effort on behalf of a teacher. But I will say that it has created a space where now parents, I feel like, don't feel like they belong anymore, or that they don't have the kind of content expertise that they need in order to support their kids in the way that they know is best. I want to be asking questions about why parents feel that way. And I want to be asking questions about what we can do in order to shift that dynamic.
Yes.
In Maryland, we're revising the way that we are teaching literacy. And, we're fortunate here to have a fantastic state leader in Carrie Wright. And we are really at the beginning portion of this work, which is going to be very hard work moving forward. But I would say one of the things that we did was we didn't just take off the shelf policy where it said, if a student can't read by third grade, then they're held back. We actually did the hard thing, and we built into the policy an informed consent process for parents to have a conversation with teachers, and teachers to actually, and schools to do some due diligence on building and forging a relationship with parents so that they are partners in the learning journey along the ride from pre-K to 3. And that every parent, guardian, caregiver in that child's network is then set up and prepared to be able to support them. I think that is where you go to say, how can policy start to bridge this gap a little bit? And it's going to come out in now seeing teachers, administrators, schools build and forge relationships with parents as if they are true partners in the learning journey, instead of asking parents to say, okay, I waive my right, or okay, you know what's best, go ahead and do it. I don't even really know. Instead, now I understand what the risks and the benefits are of retention. And I've decided with you, the professional who's giving me the guidance, that this is the right course of action for my child because I know them. I want to give that power back.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things as I'm listening to you just talk about that engagement of parents, when I was at the California Department of Education, I started working with Learning Heroes, led by
I know Learning Heroes are
and Cindy Williams. And it was so eye-opening to me to hear a little bit just about, one, the gap of understanding of what parents believe, but then two, they did so much research on the teacher side of the barriers and this feeling that teachers have of, I don't know how to have these hard conversations. How do you go to a parent and have this really hard, honest conversation that your child's 3 levels below grade level and what they need and how they can support? There's just talking about fear, so much fear there. And how do we equip teachers to be able to feel really confident in that work? And what does that mean and look like? And so that there really is that true partnership. Because what I fear sometimes, and you guys are doing amazing work, Nick, so this is just from my previous experience of what I've seen, is that it becomes this, we want you to talk and have this mandate, but the teacher then is like, here's the information. And there's not the unpacking or the sitting side by side to really figure it out and creating the space even to be able to do that within a system. But I love that you guys are tackling this as a state. I think it's such important work and definitely something that we'll be keeping an eye on of how this continues to unfold, because it really can set things up for, I think, precedent for others to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. And I hope that we can do it a little bit differently than it's been done in the past. And I hope that it has the kind of outcomes. We'll be on it for the next few years. Because change takes a lot of time.
And it does.
When you say fear in that conversation, it's really true. I just want to end with maybe a story if I can.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
As a young teacher, when I was in Pittsburgh, nobody ever told me how to have a conversation with a parent. They just they just kept saying, let's call the parents, call the parents. And I'm like, okay. And I'm 22, right? Fresh out of college. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? And so I remember procrastinating. And then finally I was I had a list of 10 kids I needed to call. I was teaching high school. I was teaching seniors primarily. And so I decided to make the calls at the last possible moment, mid-Sunday afternoon. I was also working in a school in which I was raised in a white community. I went to school in a primarily white institution, and then I started working in a school in Pittsburgh that was nearly 100% African American students, low socioeconomic. I was very much an outsider. I was out of my element in the race space and the cultural space, not in the socioeconomic space. But for sure in those spaces, I didn't realize it then. I didn't know where the calling was kind of coming from, if there was one or whatever. And I stepped in to a hornet's nest on a Sunday afternoon because I made one phone call. It was literally the first one I made, and I called, and the adult picked up, and they were like, "Who is this? What? Who? You're calling on the Lord's Day?" Absolutely not. Never again. Don't ever call this house again on a Sunday. And I was like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And I just like I hung up the phone, and I was like, I'm not doing that again. Right. And I mean, it was a long time before I started like trying to connect and make relationships with parents again.
Yes.
And I attribute a lot of that to like, I didn't have anybody really showing me the ropes. I didn't have anybody talking to me about it. I didn't have any like practice. The more we can kind of like practice this, to your point, the more comfort we're going to build in it. And it does take time. Again, back to Adrienne Marie Brown's fractals, right? If we can do it on a small scale, we can learn how to do it on a really large scale.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if we can practice that uncomfortable nature, that thing that sits inside of us that's given us a fear of having a conversation with somebody that we don't know where it's going to go, how it's going to go, then we might be able to overcome the honesty gap, and we might be able to overcome my child's report card is actually more important, back to Learning Heroes, is more important than the state assessment, right?
Yeah.
Because like what I'm hearing from the teacher and the grades they're getting is actually better than how they're doing. Yeah. Which is not true, right? Yeah. Like we know it's just absolutely not true.
Yes.
And it's partly because, teachers don't practice talking to parents and giving hard feedback and saying like, here's what you can work on and here's the tools you have in order to do it. Yeah. And I think we can just do so much better there. And I'm looking forward to like this being the phase of life that I support that work.
Yeah, I love that, Nick. Well, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate you having this conversation and carving out the space for it.
I appreciate that you have the space to be carved out. So thank you. Yeah. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, for me too. All right, everyone. A friendly reminder that Parsec Education's early bird sale is live. Get 50% off tickets for the 2026 Measure What We Value Summit happening February 4th through 5th in Fresno, California. Don't miss this limited time offer and the opportunity to experience our incredible MC, Brandon Leake, season 15 winner of America's Got Talent. Secure your tickets now at parsecsummit.com.